I'm going to go to my guests. We are joined with the one and only the man of the hour, Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. In his new book, or his previous book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in parts examines the life of Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing political discourse and geopolitical stage. Caleb, I'm going to have to update that. Kamala Harris is no more, even though the book is still there. Do you have any more recent books, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I wrote the book about Brian Thompson and the danger of an American years of lead.
Yes.
Yeah. And for a while, Amazon wouldn't let me put it up. So I took Brian Thompson out of the title. I just called it The Danger of an American Years of Lead, and Amazon allowed it to go through. So it's up on Amazon now. They apparently have a ban on books with names related to recent tragic events. So I was able to get it through on Amazon. Yeah, pretty ridiculous.
What the hell is with the censorship stuff? I mean, they are acting like reality is the issue, right? I mean, like I remember when January 6th happened, and people who were reporting on January 6th, and I mean, like literally just a video camera watching what was taking place. Videos, by the way, that they used in Congress. YouTube was penalizing those channels. My channel being one of them. And again, the only thing it did was show what was happening in real terms, like just a depiction of reality. That's all, just a clear depiction of reality. And they're like, we don't like that. That's problematic. And it's like, dude, it's what happened. Nobody is like, for you to put in Brian Thompson in the title, a CEO got whacked. And whether they like it or not, a CEO got whacked. I hate this stuff. I mean, they do this stuff all the time, even on YouTube. And I know I'm complaining because on my channel, it gets demonetized when I'm doing videos on things that are literally happening. It's just aggravating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I find it amusing. I mean, now that Facebook doesn't have fact checkers anymore, I think that's awesome. That's great because the fact checkers were always running a very, very biased job.
Yes.
And the fact that there's just this outrage. I think Joe Biden even mentioned that in his closing address. He said, there's no fact checkers anymore. It's like, good. Clearly the fact checkers were there to do a job to serve the establishment. So the outrage about that just kind of shows you how negative of an influence those fact checkers really were.
Yeah. I mean, they were like, I always ask the question, is the fact checker going to point out that the government is lying about whatever the government is lying about? So when when that paper came out in NBC News that effectively said that Joe Biden was using disinformation in a propaganda war, and they were talking about it in these triumphant ways, like this is a great thing that Joe Biden is lying to the American public. It's like, what the hell? Are you serious? Right? Or the Hunter Biden laptop, or the 51 intelligence officials with the fact checkers ever called that stuff out? And of course, the answer is no. When Joe Biden said Putin is trying to take over all of Europe, is the fact checker going to point out, okay, this makes no sense. They started off with 150,000 people. That's not enough for Ukraine, let alone all of Europe. No, they're not. Like, meaning the fact checker is going to have a very specific point of view in a context that is going to drop the larger context of whatever they're talking about because they're only going to fact check certain things. I agree 1,000%.
No, I remember when Trump was first running for president, I was sitting in the newsroom at RT watching one of his campaign rallies. And Donald Trump said what he said throughout his campaign, which is he said Hillary Clinton literally started ISIS, right? And he said that many times. And CNN below it said, Hillary Clinton starts ISIS. False. ISIS started by al-Baghdadi. And I'm just like, oh gosh, the joke somebody made, it's like, Donald Trump calls Elvis king of rock and roll. False. Musical genre has no hereditary titles. You got him. It's just like, it's like on that level of,
petty.
That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it comes across as petty.
And, there's that website, Snopes.com, right? And if you look at that, right, they have like in big letters, like green and true, like yellow mixed and red false. And often if you actually read the article then that goes with it, it's a much more nuanced and complicated answer.
Yes.
But whether they give it a green or a yellow or a red is a very political thing because they know most people are not going to actually read the article. right? And you'll notice that, and that, you know, they'll label things false, and if you read the article, it's not really false. They'll label things true, and it's like, well, it's kind of true, but not really. But that initial label is a very, very political thing, because most people won't actually read the article. And as they always say, the truth is stranger than fiction, and often you can't just say true or false to these things. They're much more complicated than that. So you can't just say true or false to, you know, like Hillary Clinton started ISIS. Well, did she literally start? I mean, she literally called up people and said, hey, let's establish the Islamic State. No, of course not. But her policies, funding radical extremists, led to the creation of ISIS. That's what I assumed Donald Trump was saying. So.
Yeah, that's my take on it too. That was the way I thought he was going at it. You know, if you're knocking over governments, you're creating destabilization, there's going to be consequences to that destabilization. Yeah, I think he's looking at it in those terms. I have to start here. This happened yesterday. Speaking, since we're having this conversation about journalism, and this was at the State Department. And I'm fascinated by this because Blinken specifically, but also Matthew Miller, have been getting their comeuppance. People have been giving them tongue lashings. There was a woman the other day who's like, you are a monster. You have no empathy. You're a war criminal. You're out here murder. Like, just astonishing tongue lashing that he has earned, by the way. Somebody told him the truth for once. But this happened to Sam Husseini. Now, he has been on our show on Fault Lines. I've met him once or twice, and I've paid attention to him over the course of the last few years as he has dealt with the press around this genocide and having to deal with people like Blinken and Matthew Miller, shill, lie, and cover for a literal genocide. This was him in the briefing yesterday getting dragged out. Just outrageous.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did
Wait a minute. That's Matt Blumenthal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Blumenthal first, and then I'll bounce to Husseini.
you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have the time to take questions
Your
at the end.
father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirked through the whole thing every day. You smirked through a genocide.
At last, when you smirk through a genocide, it's so true. Because Matthew Miller literally smirked through a genocide day after day after day. Give me your take on that first. I mean, clearly, this was meant more as a tongue lashing. I don't know if he really expected those questions to be answered in that case. It was kind of just this righteous anger at what has been taking place over the last year, and the way that the government, especially these kind of, let's say, appendages of that government, came out to cover for it day after day after day without necessarily giving an honest account of what was happening. So there's that. Give me your take on that before I go to Sam Hussein.
Well, you know, when he said, you know, are you compromised by Israel? That's a really fair point. And it really shows that all this stuff about foreign meddling and all of that, I mean, there's such a huge double standard when it comes to Israel. Israel is able to get away with everything. You know, I think we have a law that if you join the military of any foreign country, you automatically lose your citizenship, right? If you join the army of another country, except Israel. Israel is the exception to that. And there's just so many ways in which Israel, a foreign country that has interests that are opposite to the United States, a foreign country that has killed American military personnel on the USS Liberty intentionally, not accidentally, a country that spied on the United States. I mean, you know, they are able to just have a free pass from all of this, and, you know, being courted by Israel, being tied in with the Israel lobby, being funded by, I mean, I think there were recent primary elections where Israel was taking credit for candidates who
They
lost
were.
and candidates who won. I mean, but we're all supposed to be upset about foreign meddling from Russia. Oh my goodness, some memes or bots, shared some things on Facebook or Twitter or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. And when he says, "Are you compromised by Israel?" I mean, yeah, it shows how embedded powerful foreign interests from Israel are within our government. I also, I do want to give Max credit because, we know Max Blumenthal for his great journalistic work with the Gray Zone and such. But let's remember that Max Blumenthal's father is Sidney Blumenthal, who was a very important advisor to Hillary and Bill Clinton. And so, Max Blumenthal comes out of the circles in Washington, D.C., where Israel exercises its influence and such. And so he sees how awful all of this is and has decided that he needs to stand up against this and loudly oppose it. So I think it's quite admirable, that he's been willing to take on this cause and such. So yeah, that was quite a video, quite a day at the State Department, and seeing the response of CNN to both Max Blumenthal's,
Oh, I'm going to get to that. I have that clip also. But first, let me get to Sam.
We'll get to that. All right, go ahead.
Because again, it's outrageous. It's a man is getting dragged out of the State Department by goons as they just court him away. As he said, "I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to get a question answered."
God, the city said simply, "We are being reborn." It's also a moment of historic possibility.
You can leave, sir. You want to come with us right
Again,
now?
I'm happy to address questions.
No,
I
want
to
answer questions.
Forward answering questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been lots of speeches.
Thank you.
Look
forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Sir, would you like to be escorted out?
Go away.
You don't have to responsibility to tell me where to go. You can be escorted out or not.
I will
Thank you. I look forward to answering questions in a minute.
I'm a journalist. I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller has explicitly told me he will not answer my question.
Thank you.
I justify
So-
what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket, the names of those who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally,
Get your hands off me.
this morning,
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking
Please, sir,
questions.
respect the
Wasn't
process.
the
IC?
wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination. You're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague?
Just why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague? I'm just trying to answer a question. And to his point, he has been asking damn good questions. And that's, part of the issue with him being there. It's like, dude, we're just trying to have a genocide and you're making our lives difficult. Give me your take on that. I like I said, I've watched Sam for over a year and a half do that specific job where he's being one of those people who are asking real legitimate questions to challenge this government and this administration in pursuit of this genocide. And there's something disgusting about the whole respect the process. What do you mean respect the process? You were murdered and back the murder of tens of thousands of babies and kids. And you're telling us, well, you should respect the process in this. It's just outrageous. I want to get your take on it. And I want to go to CNN's response to what was taking place. Because I think it's indicative of why people hate the media. But give me your take on this.
Well, it's really shocking to watch. I mean, it's like they're dragging him out. They got one guy, on his head, one guy on his feet, and another guy, and they're taking three guys are dragging him away from his chair. And I've been to State Department briefings before, and I've asked questions to State Department officials, and they always are talking about freedom of the press. It's like an obsession. Every press, conference, every briefing they have there, they'll talk about some journalist somewhere in some country that, of course, the American government doesn't like, who's being persecuted, and how much they believe in freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And they're fighting for the rights of journalists, and they're fighting for the freedom of the press around the world. And it's like in that very room where they're constantly pontificating and, reflecting about, we got to protect journalists and freedom of information, and we got to stop China from oppressing journalists. We got to stop Russia from oppressing journalists. Here's some journalist in Venezuela got arrested for this. And, they're constantly condemning countries in the world. And then in that very room, they drag this guy out for asking questions about what Israel is doing. At that point, they just don't have any credibility with which to stand. I mean, this is absurd. I mean, you couldn't make this up. You almost have to wonder if they almost wanted to show the world this, like they did this to demonstrate to the world that, we're going to keep talking about free press, but we can still, pull out our iron fist if we want to. Like, this was like a display of force to like subtly send a message or something, because it's like absurd. I mean, they didn't have to respond this way to this guy. Nope. They could have given him a non-answer. They're very good at giving non-answers at the U.S. State Department. They do that a lot. So why not just give him a non-answer like always? Why did they respond this way? I mean, what was going on there?
I don't know. He clearly annoyed them in the way, or in the questions that he was answering. This is CNN's response to all of that. And you would think that journalists would back journalists, right? Like, even, I got to be honest, even for like RT and Sputnik, you would think that they would have this kind of assessment that we need to protect all of us, so that we're not picked off one by one when we're putting out reports or stories that we don't necessarily like. I thought that was true with Assange. I thought that was true with journalism in general, but that's not the way it works. There's an us and a them. That's the way they look at it. CNN is clearly part of the us crowd in the way that they think about themselves. Hussein, not so much. So this was CNN's take on that. I mean, they didn't have the same point of view, I think, that we have on this.
What I would call less mainstream journalists, more opinion journalists, who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House, and to ask questions of the representatives of that administration. So I'm always amazed by, whenever I go to these different press rooms, about who's actually sitting there. It's not just Americans, it's people from all over the world, from Turkey, from China, from South Korea, who get to ask questions of people like Matt Miller at the State Department, or Karine Jean-Pierre.
By the way, Sam is American.
Yeah.
Sam is American. So, I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but this stuff all around the world. But I'm sorry. And even this notion of, I'm surprised by seeing independent journalists there. Because from his point of view and his conception, they're not supposed to be there. Does he fully get the hatred that America has for the mainstream media and this notion of lack of credibility? Like, these people sit in these ivory towers as if, we are the pinnacles of journalism. We are the people who America comes to when we need to get information. That's not true. Looking at the way America sees these people and despises much of the information that comes out of them. Democrats are more in line with what the mainstream media is saying, but even Democrats look at these people with a certain amount of derision. I'm sorry. It's just the idea that he's making this argument of, I'm shocked to see some of these people. I mean, there are people all over the world who are sitting here, and these people aren't necessarily mainstream. Sam is an American, every bit as an American as this asshole who's saying this. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to the beginning. It just annoys me.
As you heard, he was repeatedly interrupted by some cringeworthy heckling by activists. I mean, we were both sitting here pretty stunned, frankly. This is supposed to be a press conference with a room of journalists. Those were activists who were interrupting the Secretary of State when he initially was thanking the press and talking about the Israeli-Hamas deal.
Yeah, I think it's really surprising. A lot of our viewers will have seen protests on Capitol Hill, for example, during confirmation hearings, but it's very rare for something like that to happen at the State Department. I'm over there all the time in that briefing room, and you need to have a reason to be at the State Department. You need to have an appointment. You need to have press accreditation to come and go. So it's unclear who those people were. So I think there's a real security question there.
Not unclear who they were.
This is a testament to American democracy and the way that American administrations approach their press rooms. They give accreditation to a wide number of journalists, and increasingly what I would call less mainstream journalists, more opinion journalists, who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House, and to ask questions of the representatives of that administration. So I'm always amazed by whenever I go to these different press rooms about who's actually sitting there. It's not just Americans, it's people from all over the world, from Turkey, from China, from South Korea, who get to ask questions of people like Matt Miller at the State Department or Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House.
He said, I'm not sure who they were, and that maybe there's a security issue here because, you know, we need to get accreditation in order to be here. Well, by definition, if they need to get accreditation to be there, obviously they have accreditation. It's not like the State Department is letting people in willy-nilly. They're clearly journalists. And his thing is, well, I don't know who these people are. There's clearly a security reason. And then goes to this idea of implying that he is not from the United States. Just outrageous. And one more point. Having a journalist dragged out of the room is a display of democracy. Just give me your take, man. It's just amazing.
Well, you know, it's interesting because you know, ABC News openly operates in Russia. They ask press questions to President Putin. They operate. RT doesn't operate now because of sanctions. RT has been shut down in America because of sanctions, etc. And there's many other examples of that. So, you know, when he's sitting there saying, oh, you know, we allow that. No, actually, the United States has made it very difficult for media outlets they don't like to operate. I mean, I
no longer have a job because of them not, you know, being okay with these media operations. And God, man, you make a really good point. You know, Europe has gotten rid of RT and Sputnik entirely. They did it before we did it here in the United States. The US has also did it. But you have Western outlets in Russia, or for that matter, covering events that are in Russia. And I remember that British guy got asked, hey, do you think it's fair that you can operate here in Russia when we can't operate in your country? And of course, they don't have an answer for that because the answer is damning it by itself.
Yeah. And also when he's talking about, oh, it's so inclusive, and it's like, what is the headline there on CNN? They're showing a guy getting dragged out, and their headline is somebody interrupted the Antony Blinken when he was speaking. It's like, no, somebody got violently dragged out of the room. Look at your screen. The headline is not somebody was rude and interrupted our great elected official. The headline is somebody's being violently escorted out of a press conference. That's what's going on there, you know? And it's like, that's what they're concerned about. They're not concerned that a journalist is being manhandled. They're concerned that that somebody interrupted the great Antony Blinken. You know, I mean, he was having his end of the Biden administration press conferences, and one of these rude little people from these non-mainstream outlets. You know, that, my goodness, how dare they even let them in the room? They're doing them a favor, and he interrupted him. Oh, you know, it shows you that they are so obviously just on the side of the press. There's, you know, I mean, of the powerful and the government itself, that they are just not even concerned about what's taking place there. Just like they sat back and let Julian Assange be persecuted, didn't speak up for Julian Assange. Just like you know, they were very silent about when the U.S. government went after the Uhuru movement and tried to, you know, equate their activism in the Black community with being foreign agents and drag them into federal court. And CNN was very silent on that. I mean, there's just many examples of this where CNN is just, you know, is just blatantly the voice of the U.S. government. I mean, it's pretty wild because CNN is technically a private company, but CNN is shown in all the airports. If you go to the airports, they show CNN. And CNN, I mean, you know, we say in the United States we don't have state media, right? But we do, right? We have corporate media that is very well embedded and connected with the state. It may not be directly run by the state, but like, you know, Anderson Cooper has admitted the way he got his start, the way he became what he is, was from the CIA. I mean, he actually says it was his working for the CIA that got him his start in media. So right there, I mean, it's not, you don't need to know about Operation Mockingbird, Project Mockingbird to know about it. I mean, Anderson Cooper has said, "Oh, how was it that I ended up being who I am?" Well, I worked with the CIA for a while, and they that's how I became a journalist. I mean, it's like, it's pretty blatant what's going on there. There was a recent clip, I believe, of Stephen Colbert interviewing people, and they were talking about the relationship that the CIA and the intelligence community have with the press. That was pretty obvious. I mean, it's very obvious. And what's frustrating is that, you know, they will condemn media from other countries and allege, oh, it's not really media, it's just trying to carry out intelligence goals. But American media is just, mainstream American media is just considered to be standard, and that's just the way it is, and we should just accept it. And it's like, no, we can see the connections here. The whole world can see this. This is a kind of a fallacy we frequently hear. I around, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, something became trendy to talk about in academia, in international politics. They would talk about, quote, democratic regression. I loved this. Democratic regression became this talking point. And it was about how there were all these countries like Venezuela and Russia where, they'd had a democracy, and the people then voted for a leader, and this leader won the elections, but then the leader changed society. So it couldn't be a democracy anymore. And it's just like in the article, Hugo Chavez won the elections in Venezuela, but then they said he started tampering with the independent institutions. He changed the economy. He changed the military. He changed these things, but he had public support in doing it. But these institutions were told, the media, the economy, the military, they're supposed to be, quote unquote, independent. And so if the elected president starts changing these things, it's not a democracy. Well, by independent, they mean serving the U.S. establishment, right?
Yes.
And so, that's just the way things are supposed to naturally be. And so if they elect a leader who changes the economy to serve Venezuela, changes the military to serve Venezuela, changes, things to serve Venezuela, well, then it's no longer independent. And similar with Russia. Everyone knows that Russian President Vladimir Putin is wildly popular. And he was elected to change things. But when he got into office, he changed the economy, he changed the military, he changed things. All of a sudden, it's not a democracy because these independent institutions have been changed, right? And it's like there's this feeling that everything is just supposed to de facto serve the U.S. imperialist, globalist status quo. And if you go against that, all of a sudden it's not democracy because these independent institutions are being messed with. Independent means serving them and doing what they want. And if anyone gets in the way of that, it's dictatorship, even if there's a popular mandate for doing so. It's like, if elections can actually change the world, they stop being free and fair elections. They stop being recognized as democratic because you're supposed to have an election that doesn't change anything. That's the point, right? All these papers about democratic regression, that's what they're saying. As long as the elections don't change anything, they're fair. But if you have an election and you elect a leader who then proceeds to actually change things, then it's dictatorship. This is the standard kind of analysis that you get from the United States, right? If media just de facto repeats the State Department line, it's free, independent media. But if media questions what they're saying, it's obviously propaganda, it's authoritarian, it's dictatorship, it's not real media. I mean, this is the terms that they set discourse. As long as media doesn't lead people to question things and leads people to just kind of follow the mainstream status quo, then it's free, independent media. We celebrate it. But if media starts to ask real questions, we consider it to be non-mainstream and illegitimate. And, we're happy to see them dragged out of the room and they're rudely interrupting Antony Blinken. I mean, this is the terms of American discourse in our time.
So true. So true. Mainstream media has difficulties, to put it mildly. And look, the American public sees it. I mean, when you ask people their take on mainstream media and the credibility that they give to it, it ranks extraordinarily low. And it seems to be getting lower and lower and lower in regards to how the American public views the truthfulness of mainstream media. It's astonishing. And then this dichotomy between how the public sees them versus how they see themselves. Like they see themselves as with these pillars of institutional truth and everything else. Whereas the American public sees them as just toting a certain narrative. The American public doesn't believe they're getting truth and honesty from media, even though they do. I'll give you an example. You mentioned the Colbert one. There was the other woman, Caitlin Collins, I believe. I believe it was Caitlin. It might have been. I may be getting the person wrong, but she's a CNN host. And she was on one of those talk shows, and she said something about media being honest, and the public laughed. Right. She was like, I didn't realize that was a joke. Well, yeah, you are a joke. Like it shows perfectly this how you see yourself versus how everybody else views you and your institution. This is not the Walter Cronkite era, right? This is not like you going to these people in order to get this kind of truth and honesty with this person of integrity. That is not the way they're viewed. And the idea that they're a cheer, that man getting hauled off with these people putting their hands on him, and they're cheering that as democracy. This is the epitome of democracy.
You know, my background, I worked for the International Action Center for Ramsey Clark, and I represented the International Action Center and Ramsey Clark and international media. And then, my first job in media was I started being the reporter of Press TV from the United Nations. And so I was credentialed. Right. So I went from being a media spokesperson for a prominent international lawyer and former U.S. Attorney General to becoming a journalist myself. And I was credentialed and I worked at the UN for Press TV. And, that was like 2013, 2014, I started doing that. And I was at the UN and I had an office in the UN. And I was in the press building with people from the New York Times, people from National Public Radio, ABC, NBC, all the outlets. And I would sit in the, there's the UN lounge where, you can have a nice drink in the middle of the afternoon and hang out with people. And they have the United Nations Correspondent Association, UNCA, that has these meetings. And I would sit with these people, many of whom had gone to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and the best schools. And I would talk to them and I would be shocked. And being the UN desk for NPR or CBS News, that's a highly competitive position, right? To get into.
How little they knew. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're making lots of money and it's very competitive to get that job and all that. And I would talk to these people and I was blown away by how little they knew. Like the war in Syria, they had no idea there was another side to it. The war in Ukraine, the conflict, Euromaidan was happening. No awareness. And I would just sit there.
Yeah. So, because I used to always have this question, are they lying or did they just not know? Your thing is, well, they're not lying. They just really don't know. They follow whatever the narrative is and they just run with whatever that narrative is. They don't necessarily look into the story to understand it contextually.
Yeah, they were, I would sit with them and I would, tell them the other side of the story and they would be shocked to hear it. Like it was like they'd never heard it before. Like the basic understanding, then there's kind of an understanding, that there's two sides to every story. And these people didn't even have that level of understanding, right? As far as they were concerned, there was one side to every story. And the fact that there was even another side, there was even another view was just something that they had never even considered. Wow. They were just like blatant. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, it shocked me. But then on the other hand, like that's why they're in the position that they're in. They've been vetted. Our educational system is very much set up to kind of reward and encourage people to think in a very obedient way. And so that's why they're in that position, right? Is they've been vetted their entire lives. Those jobs are very, very competitive and they find the people that are the most obedient, the most compliant, the most non-thinking. I also tell people about my only CNN appearance. I was on CNN in 2013 about Syria as a representative of the International Action Center. And it was when Obama was on the brink of sending missiles to Syria. And they had me on to represent the protests that were going on. And they interviewed me. It was live on the air. And they started out talking to me. And I talked about, we should spend money on jobs and schools and all of that. And then I started talking about the Syrian rebels. And how, they've committed terrorist attacks and how, I don't believe what's coming out about the chemical weapons attack and the U.S. government has lied about weapons of mass destruction before. And I remember the camera crew that was interviewing me, they were physically afraid. They were, I was like, you know what I mean? They were very, very scared. You know, they were really, really afraid. Like, it was almost like, we're going to get in trouble for putting this guy on the air, you know?
Wow.
And after the interview, they were like, oh, you know, and I mean, they were terrified, you know, like almost like they might lose their jobs or something, because they let me say that on the air. They'd been encouraged to let a protester speak. And so they set it up, and then they didn't expect me to say what I was going to say about the rebels and about the terrorists and such. So I remember that. And I've never been on CNN ever since then. You know, I never again was I ever invited back to CNN. So I hold with pride my one CNN appearance in 2013.
Oh, that's too funny. God, man, that's man.
But I'll tell you another thing. That was 2013. That was right when, you know. So the next day, I was in D.C. at a rally at the White House, you know, that we had. It was the very next day, and there were, you know, anti-Assad people there, and I was shouting at them. The clip of me in front of the White House shouting at these anti-Assad people, like I think I shouted at one of these people that was trying to overthrow the Syrian government. I shouted, "You are a terrorist murderer."
Right.
Somebody was there, I don't know who, and filmed me shouting, "You are a terrorist murderer." They have taken that clip, and there's a Netflix documentary series called How to Become a Dictator. And they have used that clip of me multiple times in it. And I'm standing in front of the White House. I shout, "You are a terrorist murderer." And they use that as like the image of like the mob, the evil dictator whips up is Caleb standing in front of that.
Wow.
Shouting, "You are a terrorist murderer."
Oh, wow.
So I love that. I'm like the bad guy in a Netflix documentary, basically about how to become a dictator. I'm the symbol of angry mob whipped up by the dictator. And they have that clip of me. So, I mean, it shows you, you know, the whole world was watching us back in 2013, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of shows, and like there's Netflix is subtly telling people by showing the clip of me. They say the dictator, in order to take power, he whips up an evil mob. Then cut to Caleb, "You're a terrorist murderer." It's like they're subtly telling people, like, guys like Caleb are the dangerous ones you shouldn't listen to. It's a compliment, you know. But you know, after that Netflix thing came out a couple of years ago, like every person I know is like, "Oh my God, you're on Netflix. You're on Netflix. You're the symbol of terrorist murderer mob." I'm just like, okay, well, I mean, it just goes to show you. But the other thing that I tell people though, and I think this is really important, is that, you know, my organization, Center for Political Innovation, we're not huge. We don't have a huge budget, but with a small group of people, you can really influence discourse. You know, there are so many times where, you know, things that we talk about, you know, that nobody talks about, we talk about them. And then suddenly, you know, the mainstream is having to address them. It's like tap dancing really quickly to address them. And that we have a way of speaking about things that are ahead of the game. And like, I feel like our role and our influence on discourse is very, very large because we are ahead of the game. I tell people that, you know, there was the Velvet Underground during the 1960s. That's a rock band. They would do things that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones hadn't done yet. And they were like ahead of the game. They would influence you know, and eventually the Beatles and the Rolling Stones would do it, but the Velvet Underground did it first. And I often feel like the kind of work that you and I do in alternative media and the kind of stuff that, you know, I mean, we are like the political Velvet Underground. We're out there pioneering, asking questions before nobody asks them, delving into topics that are considered off limits before the mainstream media finally decides they have to address them. Like, that's the role that we play. We are the pioneers of media and information and political discourse. I think it's a really great role to play. We go out and we take the risks and we ask the questions and we do things that the more mainstream outlets don't have the courage yet to do, but sometimes we do them first, and that leads to the conversation getting bigger, and then bigger forces can ask the questions.
Yeah, with the last line. I mean, in real terms, especially with social media, we have started. It's pretty wild. I mean, thinking that social media has become this kind of giant within itself, in the way that people go to it for information, even beyond the mainstream media. It's fascinating, this kind of changeover in politics that I don't really think politicians know how to deal with yet, because it's such a new frontier in the questioning. By the way, mentioning events, please talk about the event that's going to take place in DC during the inauguration. You came up with this idea, and I'm fascinated by the way people describe you. Sometimes they talk about you as a Trump supporter. Sometimes they talk about you as a fascist because you are apparently a Trump supporter. And what people don't get is that your point of view seems to be, look, man, I just want less war. And Donald Trump may be open to doing less war, and we should support him on that front if indeed he wants to go in that direction. And that he should be given credit for it if that's indeed the direction he wants to go. And we shouldn't just assume that he's going to be this kind of ogre that we can't necessarily negotiate with, or that we can't necessarily influence. Am I explaining that right? Because I don't want to mischaracterize you.
Yeah, no, I mean, during the election, I mean, our organization, Center for Political Innovation, we don't endorse any candidates, you know, but we did go through the streets of New York City with a big banner of Trump and Kim Jong-un shaking hands that said, "Only peace can make America great again," showing what we thought was the best thing that Trump did when he was president the first time, which was go and try to make peace with North Korea. So, you know, we've done that, and we're having an event on Inauguration Day themed around that. We're bringing our banner to DC for Inauguration Day. We've got another banner about a peace bridge over the Bering Sea connecting Alaska to Russia. And then at 5:30 p.m. at Hilton Garden Inn, which is 2 blocks from the White House on 14th Street, I think 815 14th Street Northwest, Hilton Garden Inn, we're having a public event, and there'll be speeches. You're going to be there. I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. I'll be there. Peter Coffin will be there. Garland Nixon's going to be there. Dr. Wilmer Leon is going to be there. There'll be other speakers as well. And we're going to have, there's also going to be, you know, time for different organizations to give a greeting and different people. So it'll be kind of a reunion of sorts of some of us from the alternative media sphere and some of us that have engaged in peace activism and stuff. And there's going to be good food, and it's just going to be a great evening. We are planning to live stream it. So if you can't be there in person, you can watch it online, but do come in person. We'll have food for the first 50 people. And it's going to be good food, too. We're talking salmon and prime rib. So, you know, salmon and prime rib for the first 50 people who come. The room itself, I'm told, holds up to 200. So if a lot of people come, great. But, you know, hey, if we get 50 people there, 50 people can have some good food. My good friend Brian is going to be playing music. He's a good musician. He does a folk background. He'll be like our musician who plays music between the different talks. Everyone who comes is going to get, you know, like a kind of a gift bag that'll have a T-shirt with Trump and Kim shaking hands on it. It says "Only peace can make America great again." In addition to that, you'll get some books and, you know, like a nice gift bag, you know, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun day, you know, and our crew is coming into town from around the country. People are coming in from Chicago. People are coming in from Minnesota. People are coming in from Boston and different parts of the country. And we're going to be in the streets during the inauguration. We're going to be, you know, with the Trump supporters on the National Mall. We have 2,000 copies of a pamphlet that we published that we're going to be handing out. And we're going to be in the streets with our big banner. And then that evening, we're having a reception. And I think we want to, I think this Inauguration Day is going to be historic. And we want to be part of it. We want to leave our mark on history. We want to be part of the conversation. So we're doing it. Yeah. You know, why not?
You know, the thing that I agree with you on is something that many on the left fundamentally miss. It's this idea that, look, man, you may not like Trump, but if he does something good, you should give him credit for the things that he does well. And if indeed, you know, he's making this argument over the course of the election that I want to end wars, not start them, we should lean into it. Meaning that should be something that we push him on, that we give him credit for, because you want him to do more of it. And if indeed he's crowd surfing, and part of the crowd surfing is getting accolades for ending wars, then we should do that. Meaning, I find it to be a worthy pursuit. I find it to be a good thing of trying to get him to stop war, whether it's coming together with North Korea, whether it's pulling out of Syria, whether it's, you know, add in whatever conflict that you want to get him out of. Meaning, I don't want him to go to war with Iran. I don't want him to, you know, invade Venezuela, if indeed that comes up on the marquee. I don't want him or our troops to remain in Syria. We can pull those troops out. Like, I want us to be less hostile around the world. And if we get a president who says that's what he also wants, we should give him credit for it when he does it, hit him for it when he does it. So I agree with you.
Yeah, well, we can't expect Trump to do anything good if he does a couple good things and no one loudly applauds it and cheers for it, or he starts to move toward doing good things and there's not a demonstration of support for him, right? We have to think about this strategically. It's not a matter of, is Trump a good guy? Is he, like, in his bones, the moral person? You know, do we morally approve of Trump? That's not the issue. The issue is that our political establishment is very, very divided. And there's a potential for things to potentially get better internationally and domestically, the potential for the FBI to maybe get reined in a little bit and stop violating our civil liberties, a potential for improving peace around the world. And we need to intervene and support whatever good could happen, in addition to just condemning the bad. I think we need to view our role as potentially changing the course of history, and that we shouldn't get into the idea that we don't have any power, that all we're free to do is complain. And that I feel like is the trap that a lot of social media discourse. It's like, the world is just kind of going to hell, and so we can complain about it, and maybe we can go viral because our complaints about it are particularly shrill or something. Like, no, we can actually change the world. We can amplify whatever good happens. We can intervene. We can make statements. And so we should do that. And that's my feeling. So I hope that we can amplify good and move toward peace in the world. So I hope people join us in DC at our event, and you'll be there. I'll be there. So will a number of our friends and others. So it's going to be a good evening.
No, man, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you inviting me into it. I don't think I always feel like I'm in the wilderness in regards to lefty channels or these type of events where I feel like I'm doing my own thing. I'm not necessarily pulled in. So no, I do appreciate you bringing me into this. And yeah, I think you're right. I do think there's something to be said about, because look, it's not that I think Donald Trump is anti-war. It's that he seems to be open to not starting wars, or at the very least making a deal in order to end conflicts in a way that I don't see on the Democratic side. I mean, Harris was a forever war candidate. Biden was a forever war candidate. And you find with this deal that Trump made with Netanyahu that just modest pressure was enough to get a deal. And it was the same deal that was being offered months ago. And you find out, like, when you're listening to some of the reporting that's going on behind the scenes, Joe Biden never pushed on this stuff. He never, used presidential might in order to get some kind of deal. And I guess from your point of view, did Joe Biden just not push because he just fundamentally agreed with what Israel was doing? I mean, if you think of the people who are running point for this, Sullivan, Blinken goes into the Middle East and he says, I am a Jew. And you think to yourself, what? Why are you telling me that? Like, everybody already knows that you're Jewish. Why do you find that is the thing that is pertinent to explain to the world when you are supposed to be there representing the interests of the American government, which may not align with the interests of Israel? There's something anti-Semitic about him doing that he fundamentally misses, because it comes across as foreign allegiance. I am a Jew, as if my representation is for the state of Israel, not America. We did the same thing in Lebanon, sending Amos Hochstein. Always mispronounce that guy's last name, Hochstein. We sent him over there, who was a former IDF soldier, while the IDF is murdering the Lebanese. And he is supposed to be representing the interests of America in Lebanon. Like, this stuff was so tilted in a particular direction that it was just overtly transparent in regards to what they were doing. I guess the question that I have for you, and I'll close it on this, is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? I've asked this question a few times to various people, and I get different answers every time I ask the question. But I am curious your take on this. Is this an issue of, well, Joe Biden didn't push because Joe Biden just fundamentally agreed with what Israel was doing in creating this greater Israel? Or did Joe Biden feel powerless, disempowered, and was just weak for cognitive and physical maladies? Like, give me your take on this. Which one is it?
Well, when I saw that tweet from Trump a couple months back about how if the hostages are not returned by the time that he gets into office, they'll be hell to pay and all of that.
Yeah.
My mind immediately went ding, 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 ding. He wants to be Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan, the day he was inaugurated, the American hostages held in Iran were returned. And that was a huge win for Ronald Reagan. And that in the Fox News universe, Ronald Reagan is a saint. He is the greatest president we ever had. They want to put him on the dime. They want to name everything after him. Yeah, And so, there was no Twitter back in 1979 or 1980. But if there had been, Reagan would have said, "Oh, Khomeini, if you don't return our hostages," and that was the narrative. Reagan was such a tough, strong leader for America. Those hostages came back the very day he was sworn in. That was the narrative. And so it occurred to me that that's what Donald Trump would like to be, right? I mean, he would like to be, the guy who returned the hostages. And It's the same deal that was offered in May, but Netanyahu wouldn't go along with it. And the incoming Trump administration made the arm twisting moves. We don't know exactly what was threatened, but the incoming Trump administration said, no, actually take this deal or there will be consequences. Biden didn't have the political bravery to do that. I will say I am really surprised, and I looked this up just before we had our chat to make sure it was still in effect. The benediction at Trump's inauguration is going to be given by Imam al-Husseini, who is a Shia Muslim cleric from Michigan, of Iraqi descent. And that has that ever happened before in American history? A Muslim imam is going to be giving the benediction at a presidential inauguration. We were all told that Donald Trump hates Muslims, wants to kill Muslims, he's racist. Not only has he got a peace deal, which Biden couldn't do, and he's not even in office yet, and he made the peace deal happen. There's going to be a Shia Muslim imam who will give the benediction. And this Shia Muslim imam who's going to be speaking has refused to call Hezbollah terrorists, actually. The New York Post and all of that are really mad that Donald Trump is having this guy give the benediction, and he's still scheduled. They haven't pulled him yet. So that says to me, this could be a really interesting 4 years. We've already got a peace deal. Hopefully there's a peace deal in Ukraine soon. We've got a Shia Muslim, Iran, there's Shia Muslims in Iran. That's the religion of the Islamic Republic of Iran, their particular wing of Islam, their imam. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. So that says to me that there's potential for Trump to go in a good direction. So we shall just have to see.
Well, I'm hoping he's going to stand by it. I want to end wars, not start them. I genuinely hope he stands by it. I mean, look, like I said, it took Nixon to go to China. Does it take Trump to go to Iran? Do we get a situation where he ends the war in Ukraine, ends the conflict in Gaza, comes to some kind of new deal and arrangement with Iran? Is that the world that we get with Trump? I don't know. But that's my hope. We'll see. Caleb, man, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. And I will be seeing you on Monday. I will be taking a train down to DC. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Brian Thompson, Danger of American Years of Lead. I'm going to put that into his bio. And and the Center for Political Innovation.
Yes.
That's the other one.
Yep.
My man, thank you for this, Caleb. I really appreciate you, my man. By the way, you're on Twitter. Are you still on Twitter at Caleb Maupin?
I am. Real Caleb Maupin. Real Caleb Maupin.
Caleb Maupin. All right, let's put that in. My man, you have a good one, man. Thank you, Caleb. I really appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Yeah.